All right, this is the press review with me, Anthony Olensky. I haven't done these in a while, but Loom just got acquired, and it reminded me of this. I got a reminder of this cool tool, and I also have a bunch of articles in my backlog that I'd like to go through with y'all. So yeah, it's Wednesday, October 18th, and the quote for today, I usually go with a quote. Every morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. Buddha. All right, so let's make this day count. I want to go through one article. It's a book review from Scott Alexander, or Astral Codex 10, also goes by that name. And the book review, it's the review of the Alexander romance. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it. Sometimes scholars go on a search for the historical Jesus. They start with the Gospels, then subtract everything that seems magical and implausible, then declare whatever is left to be the truth. The Alexander romance, that's the name of the book, is what happens when you spend 1,000 years running this process in reverse. Each generation, you make the story of Alexander the Great a little wackier. By the Middle Ages, Alexander is fighting dinosaurs and riding a chariot pulled by griffins up to heaven. People ate it up. So here's a side note from me, just so you understand what we're getting into after this little intro. It's a book about Alexander the Great, and I had no idea about this book before I read this review. So yeah, let's jump in because it touches upon different stages of our history and just mythology and how we humans, I guess, interpret our surroundings. So back to the article. People ate it up. So the romance stayed near to the top of bestsellers lists for over 1,000 years. Some people claim, without citing sources, that it was the number 2 most read book of antiquity and the Middle Ages, after only the Bible. The Quran endorses it, the Talmud embellishes it, and Mongol Khan gave it rave reviews. While historians and critics tend to use phrases like contains nothing of historic or literary value, this was the greatest page-turner of the ancient and medieval worlds. So there is no single Alexander romance. Every culture from Ethiopia to Russia added their own bits and adapted it to their own needs. The Persian version changes things around so that Alexander is secretly the descendant of the rightful Shah of Persia. The Jewish version adds bits about how Alexander knelt before the high priest of Jerusalem and said that the Lord was the one true God. Someone from Syria added the bits about Gog and Magog. Nobody knows who added the parts with the 36-foot tall giants, the 3-eyed lions, the sphere people, and the headless man. We're just fucking people are incredible with their imagination, right? Anyway, back to the article. This makes it hard to review the Alexander romance. Some historians describe it as more of a genre than a single story. The outline below will be based on Penguin's The Greek Alexander Romance, a pastiche of several versions, keeping the skeleton of a 15th century Sicilian manuscript. Its history ensures that it's widely uneven. Some parts seem to be mostly a real history of Alexander with a few embellishments. Others are obviously completely imaginary. I'm going to assume Alexander's real conquests and focus on the imaginary parts. So side note here, hopefully whoever is listening to this, you'd know about Alexander the Great, right? He conquered most of Middle East and then ventured as far as Persia and then ventured as far as India. So this incredible conqueror of the ancient world. And so that these are the facts, and you can go through history books. But I'm gonna just go through this book review, and as the author says, focus on the imaginary parts because they're just fucking incredible. So let's jump into the section entitled "The Birth of Alexander." So Nectanebo was a pharaoh who was also a wizard. He ruled Egypt wisely. When enemies attacked, he would magically vaporize their enemies from afar. One day, he screed some enemies approaching Egypt's border, probably the Persian army of Cambyses. This is in in brackets, when he tried to vaporize them, the magic didn't work. He realized that the gods had declared that Egypt must fall, so he fled to Macedonia, working as a magician for hire to make ends meet. Queen Olympias couldn't produce an heir, so she hired a local magician to restore her fertility. Nectanebo fell in love and wanted to have sex with her. So he told her that she wasn't conceiving because the god Ammon had destined her to bear his demigod son. Her problem was that she was having sex with her husband, King Philip, instead of Ammon. When Olympias was skeptical, Nectanebo cast a spell that made her have a dream where Ammon appeared to her and said this was definitely true. Convinced, she agreed to lie in wait for Ammon when her husband was away on campaign. Nectanebo cast a spell to make himself look like Ammon and had sex with her, and she became pregnant. It's just people like this. This is something that was written in 2000 or 1000 BC, around that time. King Philip came back from campaign and was angry. So Nectanebo transformed into a giant snake, slithered up to Olympias at a state event, kissed her, then transformed into an eagle and flew away. Everyone accepted that this as proof that Olympias had been chosen by God, and King Philip withdrew his complaint. Nectanebo then became the court doctor, advising Queen Olympias on when to give birth. As her labor began, he advised her not to push because the astrological chart was less than perfectly ideal. For hours, the poor woman tried to hold it in as Nectanebo became increasingly agitated about improper positioning of Mercury or whatever. Finally, Nectanebo cast the horoscope and found that the destiny of someone born at the exact moment would be to rule the world. He told Olympias to push. The baby came out immediately, and then they named him Alexander. So just Alexander the Great. He was actually, I got the dates wrong, but he was born 356 BC. That's kind of just to make this thing right historically. Anyway, Alexander and Darius. Yes, we're skipping a lot. So there were a lot of Alexander conquered a lot, and then he started to he set his sights on Persia, and Persia was ruled by Darius. Anyway, back to the article. So as Alexander advanced, King Darius of Persia sent him increasingly insulting letters, to which Alexander sent back letters with dazzling, witty responses to the insult. For example, from Darius, heavily edited for length. The King of Kings, the race of the gods, who raises in heaven with the sun, the very god Darius, to Alexander, my servant. So he calls his enemy his servant, which is, I think, quite, just gangster. Anyway, I order and command you to return home to your parents, to be my slave and to rest in the lap of your mother Olympias. That is what suits your age. You still need to play and be nursed. Therefore, I have sent you a whip, a ball, and a chest of gold, of which you may take what you prefer. The whip to show that you still ought to be at play. The ball so that you can play with your friends. I have enough gold and silver to fill the whole world, so I have sent you the chest of gold, so that if you are unable to feed your fellow bandits, you can now give them what they need to return each to his country. And Alexander replies to Darius, "Why did you write to me that you possess so much gold and silver? So that we should fight all more bravely to win it? If I conquer you, I shall be famous and a great king among both Greeks and barbarian for conquering a ruler as great as Darius. But if you defeat me, you will be you have done nothing outstanding, simply defeated a bandit, and as you have wrote to me. You sent me a whip, a ball, and a chest of gold to mock me, but I regard these as favorable omens. I accepted the whip so as to flay the barbarians with my own hands. The ball, as a sign that I shall be ruler of the world, which is spherical and like a ball. The chest of gold you sent me is a great sign. You will be conquered by me and pay tribute." Darius then tried sending Alexander several more letters, all of which have a vibe of, the jerks still recalled, they're they're out of you. When Alexander, this is a great fucking quote. Anyway, when Alexander was camped outside the Persian capital, he, and here in brackets, at the instigation of the god Ammon, or maybe Hermes, tried a crazy gambit. He pretended to be Alexander's messenger to Darius and went into the Persian capital to deliver a generic message. Darius invited him to stay for dinner, and all the Persians were awed by the godlike appearance of this messenger. In brackets, also, the text offhandedly mentioned, then never brings up again, that Alexander was only 4 feet tall, and everyone was surprised by this. So, during the dinner, Alexander kept pocketing the gold and silver dishes in his cloak. Someone complained, and Alexander made a big show about how the King Alexander gave banquets in Macedonia. He always let guests take the dishes home as souvenirs, and he assumed the custom in Persia would be the same. But if they are so stingy that they won't even let him take a few dozen gold plates, then fine, he'll just have to report that back to the Macedonian people. At this point, the Persians started to feel like he was putting them on. One former ambassador recognized Alexander and sounded the alarm, and he had to get out of there quickly. Luckily, Alexander outran everyone in Persepolis, slipped through the gates, and made it back to his own camp. Also, his camp was across a river that froze and melted in an alternating cycle once every few days, and he ran across it just at the moment it melted. So the Persians were stuck on the other side and couldn't pursue him. Right? Like, who makes this shit up? You watch like Family Guy or South Park these days, and like there's so many different or like Rick and Morty, and they're crazy scenes and just like super random. But like people already had that kind of imagination and made wacky shit up thousands of years ago, I guess. Anyway, back to the article. The next day, Alexander ordered battle against the Persians. The Macedonians were outnumbered but won easily. King Darius fled back to his city, plotting to raise another army and get revenge. However, the 2 Persian traders, hoping to be rewarded by Alexander, murdered Darius and then ran off. Alexander reached the city just as Darius was dying. This was with his last few breaths. Darius admitted Alexander had always been the better man, and he was deeply happy Alexander would rule Persia from then on, and how he voluntarily relinquished the kingship to him, and how Alexander must marry his daughter. Alexander wept bitterly over Darius' death and vowed to rule Persia wisely and marry Darius' daughter. Then he went back to the crowd and said that the people who killed Darius should come forth so he could reward them. I swear I will raise them up and make them conspicuous among men. Darius' killers came forth, and Alexander crucified them, explaining that he didn't break his oath because he sure did make them high up and conspicuous. Anyway, another section. So Alexander is now in India. So he conquered Persia, and he's venturing into India. Perhaps you have heard that Alexander tried to conquer India, but his troops mutinied, and he had to turn back. This is an absurd lie. His troops tried to mutiny, but Alexander talked them down with a brilliant speech. Then he challenged Porus, king of India, to single combat and won. Basically, like the author of the review is making fun of the fact that this book is so full of shit. But there are great paintings and like photos there. So another section, Alexander at the ends of the earth. So India was the easternmost part of the known world. So Alexander got curious what was east of India and decided to march there and find out. His first night east of India, he was attacked by a Triceratops. At least this is how I interpret the Odonotyranus toothed tyrant. This 3-horned monster bigger than the elephant that killed 26 Macedonian warriors. In the Syrian version, it took 300 men to drag its body out of a river, and the Armenian version, 1,300. So next, Alexander encountered peoples with various combinations of body parts, 1 arm and 3 eyes, 3 arms and 1 eye, 5 legs, 2 noses, 7 ears. All of these kinds of blend together. To me, highlights are the giant, 36 feet tall, killed 100 Macedonians, the spherical giants with expressions like lions, the fleas as big as frogs, the men with hair all over their bodies, and the 30-foot-long donkeys. People just like reading these things, this book like in the 1300s, and thinking like, whoa, shit, I gotta go to India to see this. So there's in the article there, here's a picture of Alexander encountering approximately the only group of people east of India who have normal human height and the correct number of eyes and limbs. So it's a painting of like people whose faces are like their heads are on the chest. There's no head and the face is on the chest, and it's wild, very trippy. Next, they came to an ocean where many soldiers were eaten by giant crabs. Alexander was fascinated and invented the diving bell so he could see that what was underneath the ocean. After a series of dives, he got down 460 feet before a fish ate the diving bell, then vomited him up on dry land. Alexander interpreted this as a sign from God, who in this version is singular, and who Alexander totally believes in, to stop trying to plumb the depths of the ocean. So there's like a painting of Alexander being basically in a little submarine. Next, they came, and in brackets, how? It's the ocean. Isn't it the ocean in the way? But anyway, next they came to a land of total darkness in the middle of the land of the fountain of youth. How did they see it? In brackets again. Alexander's cook tried to boil dried fish in fountain of youth water, but the fish came back to life. When he noticed, he suspected it might be the fountain of youth, so he drank the water himself and kept the jar for later. But for some reason didn't tell the rest of the army. Later, he gave the jar to Alexander's daughter, Care. Still later, when they were too far away to return, Alexander heard that they had learned the secret of immortality and not given him any, and he cursed them. The cook went off to become an immortal water spirit, and Kara an immortal desert spirit. Finally, Alexander reached the end of the world where the sky meets the earth, which was inhabited by griffins, in brackets, other sources say big white birds that ate carrion. He ordered his men to capture 2 of the griffins and starve them for a few days until they were very hungry. Then he attached them to a chariot, sat in the chariot, and with a fishing rod attached to a piece of meat, and dangled it above them. The griffins started flying as hard as they could, lifting him into the air. Higher and higher Alexander went until a creature in the form of a man approached him and said, and this is a quote from the book, "Oh, Alexander, you have not yet secured the whole earth, and you are now exploring the heavens? Return to earth as fast as possible, or you will become food for these birds. Look down on the earth, Alexander." I looked down, somewhat afraid, and behold, I saw a great snake curled up in the middle of the snake, a tiny circle like a threshing floor. Then my companion said to me, "Point your spear at the threshing floor, for that is the world, the snake in the sea that surrounds the world. The snake is the sea that surrounds the world. Thus, admonished by providence above, I returned to earth." It's great. He's just like flying. He's sitting there's a painting. He's sitting on a throne, and the throne is on a griffin, and he's holding a piece of meat. He's flying around above earth. Anyway, next section, Alexander and the naked philosophers. So Alexander heard that there were some wise naked philosophers in India and decided to test their wisdom. Slightly edited. So here's the quote from the book. "Who are the greater in number?" he asked. "The living or the dead?" "The dead are more numerous," they replied, "but because they no longer exist, they cannot be counted. The visible are more numerous than the invisible." "Which is stronger, death or lie?" asked Alexander. Death or life, sorry. "Life," they replied, "because the sun as it rises has strong, bright eyes, but when it sets appears to be weaker." All right, "Which is greater, the earth or the sea?" "The earth. The sea is itself surrounded by earth." Kind of counterintuitive, right? But whatever. "Which is the wickedest of all creatures?" And here's the, I guess, most obvious answer: man. Then they criticized Alexander for being too proud and starting too many wars. So Alexander just answers, "If it is ordained by providence above that we shall all be slaves and servants of the divine will, The sea does not move unless the wind blows it, and the trees do not tremble unless the breezes disturb them. And likewise, man does nothing except by the motions of divine providence. For my part, I would like to stop making war, but the master of my soul does not allow me. If we were all of like mind, the world would be devoid of activity. The sea would not be filled. The land would not be farmed. Marriages would not be consummated. There would be no begetting of children. How many have become miserable and lost all their possessions as a result of my wars? But others have profited from the property of others. Everyone takes from everyone and leaves what he has taken to others. No possession is permanent. So basically he's saying, yeah, fuck it, I conquered, but there is some good that came out of it, and yeah, like rather than being a slave and just like doing nothing, I decided to go for it, grab what's mine. Boo-hoo, like no possession is permanent. So there is go back to the article, there is a weird echo of this story of all places, the Talmud, although the Talmud is a sacred text for the Jews, for those of you who might not know that. And although here Alexander is interviewing the sages of Israel, who we assume are clothed, taking here slightly edited. So here's a quote from the book. The Talmud relates that Alexander asked the sages of the Negev desert. The first one is the distance from heaven to earth greater, or the distance from east to west? They answered him, from east to west is further, and they brought a proof that when the sun is in the east, everyone can gaze at it. Similarly, when the sun is in the west, everyone can gaze at it. However, when the sun is directly above, you cannot gaze at it. This proves that the distance from east to west is greater than the distance from heaven to earth. The other sages disagreed and claimed that the distances between them is equal. They brought a proof from a verse as to why you cannot stare at the sun when it is directly above. They answered that it is because when it's in the west or east, there are mountains and hills and other obstructions that block the searing brightness of the sun. However, when it is above, there is nothing obstructing the glare of the sun. All right, whatever. Then Alexander then asked, what was created first, the heaven or the earth? They answered him that heaven was created first based on other let's look at first, whatever. 3, when then he asked them what came first, light or darkness? When they saw where he was leading, they distracted him and answered that of this they did not know. When they were concerned lest he asked them what is above and what is below, what was before, what was after. Questions are prohibited to discuss. Next, he asked them who is called wise, and they answered him, one who considers the consequences of his actions. Very wise, I guess. Who is called wealthy? They answered, he who is happy with his lot. Other quote from Ethics of the Fathers. What should a person do to live? They responded, he should humble himself. What should a person do to die? He should raise himself. Then people will give him the evil eye out of jealousy, and then will eventually harm him and cause him death. Whoa. So, yeah, if you want to die, be ambitious and try to do something good or like create something or add value with your life, because people will notice and then they will want to kill you. What a great lesson in the Talmud. What should one do to gain favor in people's eyes? They told him, stay away from high positions, kings, and officers. That's such a fucked mentality, and no wonder why people are the way they are these days, I guess. Thousands of years of reading this stuff. Because when people see that you are consorting with the high class, they will become jealous and despise you. Alexander responded, my idea is better than yours. By being around the kings and nobility, you can help people with their needs and they will like you. Is it better to live on the land or the sea? They answered the land, because a person traveling on the ocean is not at peace with himself. He is concerned about mishaps while traveling. When he arrives home back on land, he's settled and has peace of mind. Fair enough, I guess. Anyway, Alexander binds Gog and Magog. So Alexander, this is another section of the book review. Alexander came to the Caucasus mountains and learned that the nation beyond the Caucasus mountains, especially two called Gog and Magog, really sucked. Just utter trash nations. You would not believe how terrible these nations were. And quote from the book, they used to eat worms and foul things that were not food at all: dogs, flies, snakes, aborted fetuses, dead bodies, and unformed embryos. Alexander, seeing all this, was afraid that they would come out and pollute the inhabited world. That's end of the quote. Oh, a sip of water. There was a place where the Caucasus, and there's a really cool painting of like the people from Gog and Magog, eating like, they're just like killing each other, eating legs and arms, and doing all sorts of weird shit described in the quote. So there was a place, back to the review, where the Caucasus Mountains, Caucasus? Maybe I'm saying wrong. Anyway, narrowed to an 18-foot pass. Alexander stopped before this place and prayed very earnestly that God heard him and pushed the mountains closer together. Then Alexander built a giant gate in between the mountains, and then he planted brambles for 300 miles in every direction and watered them so that the brambles made a giant mass of thorns and that covered the mountains for 3,000 miles so that the unclean nations could never get through. Let's plant some trees and gate the fucked up people. That was the idea, I guess. In case you're wondering, in addition to Gog and Magog, this saved us from the nations of Angois, Aegis, I'm pronouncing them wrong, probably, whatever. Difar, Tunai, Fari, Zayo, whatever. They're like a bunch of other nations. I recognize two of these, the Samaritans and the Alans, as real steppe tribes. The others are probably imaginary steppe tribes meant to represent how big and scary the steppe was in the Mediterranean imagination. The Caspian Gates of Alexander are sometimes identified with the real-world Caucasus fortification of Derbent. And there's a photo of the gate if you're watching this on YouTube. All right, another section of the book review, the Alexander Romance and Popular Literature. So, the Alexander Romance is, in many ways, not a very good book. Obviously, it's bad history, bad geography, and bad science, but it's not even consistent with itself. Alexander, we are told, isn't the son of the god Ammon, but of the pharaoh Nectanebo. But when he goes to the oracle of Ammon in Libya, the god says he is his son and charges him with founding Alexandria in Egypt, right? But when he gets to Alexandria, he learns the city has been foreordained by the god Serapis, almighty ruler of heaven and earth. But by the time he is in the Caspian, he makes a prayer worthy any saint of the Judeo-Christian God who answers his plea with a miracle. Some of these contradictions are the effect of dozens of different versions haphazardly combined by penguin classics, others by the ancients themselves. Alexander's character shifts rapidly based on whatever lets him make the wittiest comment at the exact moment. Sometimes he plays the humble sage, talking about how nobody can know the movement of providence. Other times, pagan gods literally appear to him and tell him that his endeavors will be successful, and he responds by doing them with maximum flair, since they can't possibly go wrong. Sometimes he spares the lives of his enemies with flowery speeches about the importance of mercy. Other times he kills people for seemingly minor infractions. Sometimes he displays superhuman genius. Other times he needs to be rescued by wise old men who know the ways of the world. The other constant is that he is always the best at everything. At age 15, Alexander entered the Olympics and won the chariot race so completely that all of his opponents literally died. The other characters are no better. Darius is a sneering villain until the moment of his death, when he gives a lovely speech about how great Alexander is and how much he deserves his victory. King Philip, Alexander's stepfather, makes a similar heel-face turn in his dying moments. The authors are clearly writing under a constraint where Alexander needs enemies, or else he can demonstrate his superiority. But also they can have somebody die without having admitted that Alexander is better than they are. The result is a lot of deathbed confessions. You can see the zigzags zigs and zags, where one culture seizes control of the narrative, the other gives it up. Alexander spends a while standing on the site of Alexandria, talking about how it will be the greatest city in the world by far and extend until the end of time, and how its patron god Serapis is the true god of the universe. Then leaves and basically never thinks about either of them again. I am told there is a version written by Persians where Alexander is the son of a Persian Shah instead of an Egyptian pharaoh, and a version written by Jews, where Alexander kneels before a high priest in Jerusalem and agrees that Judaism is the true religion. Just it's funny how like different religions and nations, whatever, just like edited the book to make the story fit their narrative of the world. Makes you wonder, like, what's up with all the other religions, and if any of the shit that we believe these days is even true. I'm gonna go there right now, though. After Alexander's death, the generals read out his will, which begins with effusive and totally unrelated to anything that has happened before, praise of the city of Rhodes, its people, and its glorious history. In the footnotes, the editor writes, one may suspect a Rhodian had a hand in the addition of the first 4 paragraphs. And the prose can be best described as overwrought. Here is Alexander's death after being poisoned. When Alexander said his last goodbye to the horse Bucephalus, the whole army hauled, making a tremendous noise. The treacherous slave who had prepared the poison and who had plotted against their lives thought that Alexander was dead and came running to see. When Bucephalus, the horse, saw him, he cast off his morose and dejected look, and just as if he were a rational, even a clever man, still a horse, right? I suppose it was done through providence above. He avenged his master. He ran into the midst of the crowd, seized the slave in his teeth, and dragged him to Alexander. He shook him violently and gave a loud whinny to show that he was going to have his revenge. Then he took a great leap into the air, dragging the treacherous and deceitful slave with him, and smashed him against the ground. The slave was torn apart, bits of him flew all over everyone like snow falling off a roof in the wind. Then the horse got up, neighed a little, and then fell down before Alexander and breathed his last. Alexander smiled at him. Then the air was filled with mist, and the great star was seen descending from the sky, accompanied by an eagle and the statue in Babylon, which was called the statue of Zeus. Zeus trembled, basically. When the star ascended again to the sky, accompanied by the eagle, and had disappeared, Alexander fell into his eternal sleep. So, yeah, it's not a very good book. Still, I will say this for it. I finished in a day when better books have taken me months. We divide high culture from mass culture. High culture, those books that plumb the depths of the human spirit, go from the Iliad through the great Greek tragedies, through Dante and Shakespeare, and so on to Tolstoy, Proust, and Knausgaard. Mass culture, these books that the average person finds entertaining, might also start with the Iliad, but ends up at Dan Brown, J.K. Rowling, and Batman comics. Mass culture follows somewhat different rules than its more prestigious relative. War and Peace sits perfect and untouchable in the temple of genius, but Batman is invented anew every few years. Really, Batman is less of a specific book or movie and more of a genre. The genre that has some conventions. The protagonist must be a man named Bruce Wayne with secret identity. As a Bat-themed superhero, he should be accompanied by a butler named Alfred and a sidekick named Robin. He should live in a city called Gotham, and it has some suggestions. If you need a villain, how about the Joker? If you need a style, how about dark and gritty? Beyond that, nothing goes. You can write a story of his origin and only tangentially related to anyone else's. You can add in new adventures. You can shift the tone from gritty to campy and back. Almost everything that happens to Alexander the Great in the Alexander romance has also happened to Batman. Alexander invented a submersible to explore the ocean depths. Batman has done the same. Alexander discovered the fountain of youth, and so did Batman. Alexander sealed evil nations behind a magic door, so did Batman, and there are links to all the stories from Batman. Alexander fought dinosaurs, Batman did too. And there are just like comparisons of like paintings of Alexander doing his batshit crazy stuff like fighting dragons or whatever, and then the Batman comics. So the Alexander romance is bad in exactly the same way comics are bad, and for the same reason. The absolutely bonkers plotliness, the haplessly bungled continuities, the confusion about its own theology and metaphysics, even the tug-of-war adaptations by cultures trying to claim the hero as their own. Are all what happens when a character is too popular to stay trapped in a single presentation and breaks loose into a collective imagination. Alexander the Great wasn't the first superhero. The title must go to Hercules or Gilgamesh or someone completely forgotten. But he might have been the first superhero to get the full treatment, complete with his own extended universe, right? They could have, true, because basically they made so many different stories about him. Then also, the first to have his own theme song. End of page 187, lambing lines on Alexander. And I'll just read it out to you as the final thing of this book review and this little press review, I guess, whatever I'm doing right now for you. So here's the theme song. King Alexander, ruler of the world, Olympias' son, the fair-bloomed rose, baptized with drenchings of the blood of kings, the mighty hero, noble like a lion, whose sword affrighted even the fiercest nations, whose javelin made the Persian army tremble, who swept the barbarians like a hurricane, where they dwelt in the four corners of the earth. He was illustrious among the Macedonians. Alack, he died untimely and was hidden like a brilliant light beneath a bushel. The ending needs to work, but of course there. That's it, right? Crazy fucking story, and like it just makes you like everything in the book review. And I think I need to just one thing to rehash is, this is the first story that creating a whole new universe and different cultures took nits and bits and adapted it to create something that could inspire people and also further the needs of, I guess, the religion, nation, culture. So yeah, wild, right? I don't know. I thought I'd share this with you because I found it like really impressive. Also the creativity of like people imagining dragons and submarines back then. So yeah, back to the quote. Every morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. So I guess the thought of one comment from like also the review is just as Alexander said, just go for it. All right, like nothing is permanent, and grab what you want to get, and don't ask for permission. I guess only forgiveness. Anyway, not a lot of wisdom from me, more from the book. Recommend reading the whole article. Just go into the article and to check out the images. They're bonkers. That's it.